Hi, my name is Shankar Hemmady. I run a small San Francisco-based consultancy called Green Horizons, with a focus on supporting entrepreneurs and NGOs that work with improving social and emotional intelligence and people's lives. I often travel around the world to understand various cultures, languages, indigenous communities, as many of us are experiencing. The only thing that seems to be predictable in life is unpredictability beyond a certain point. Impermanence is like a permanent feature in our life. And on one hand, this can lead us to a lot of anxiety and clinging on to comfort zones, which is our natural response. On the other hand, life could become a never ending adventure. So I'm just starting this series of interviews. We'll be hearing from several interesting people I've met through the course of my life. And we want to learn from them how these challenges that they faced in their own life, how did it shape their life? And we want to know, is it possible that people can thrive through the challenges? When they're going through all these things, can they go to the next level of their own evolution? And what psychologists and neuroscientists call post-traumatic growth. So it's like a caterpillar that goes into a cocoon at some point in its life and then emerges as a colorful butterfly. So with that, Adam, my friend, my first interviewee is Adam Byrne. Please tell a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and anything you want to say.
Wow, well, I'm honored to be your first interviewee, Shankar. I appreciate you having me and for an opportunity to share a little about myself. My name is Adam Byrne. I'm 40 years old. I just turned 40.
Wow,
It was a fun
congratulations.
one. Thank you. And I grew up in the far corners of Northern California amongst the redwood trees. And um, yeah, I lived there until I was 20 years old. I come from a broken family for various reasons that I can share as you may or may not ask. um, I am an Air Force veteran. I spent 4 years in the Air Force working on aircraft, which led me to various fascinating and not so fascinating places on the planet Earth in service to my country. Um, and by training, I am a therapist. However, more recently, I work more in the administrative end of offering healthcare services. And so that's the short version.
So, Adam, it's interesting. I remember the way we met was at a retreat organized by the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research. It's still hard up in the redwoods. Exactly. That was your comfort zone, and that was something new to me. I was not as much into redwoods. And we were three of us, I remember, from three different cultures. We had with us a wonderful young man, an Asian American, and you from the Air Force. And I think the third person was a student. And
Yeah.
I was like a typical Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area geek and entrepreneur. And the three of us met. Tell me, what was it like for for us to meet? And I mean, this whole thing unfolded. I knew someday I would talk to you much more about it.
Yeah. Well, the experience at Seacare where you and I met, has I think for sounds like for both of us was a very fortuitous and just a wonderfully immersive and joyful uh, learning experience. And in my case, in particular, that retreat that we had at Stillheart um, was the first time that we had all really kind of met in an extended way as a group to explore, what is this thing called compassion, and how is that even described across cultures and space and time? How do we meet that? And it was a very moving experience for me to be there with people who were demographically perhaps dissimilar to me, because it afforded an opportunity for me to learn just about things from perspectives that I just don't know. And I think, even through the whole program, which lasted a year, I was able to reflect on my own experience, particularly, around being in the service, in an entirely different way. Using kind of a vernacular that was entirely different as well. In the military, people don't really kind of talk about feeling words very much. They might. The feeling is, the feeling ranges are limited in the military, but what I also found through the service and then after is that I wasn't really cut out for it. I'm not really a military mind, but I actually come from a family of law enforcement, and my father was in the Navy. My grandfather was in the Navy as well.
Wow.
My grandfather was a Los Angeles Police Department motorcycle cop for 20 years, and my mother was a probation officer, and so a lot of this discipline and regiment was kind of baked into my DNA. But I was the youngest in my family, and maybe baked in a little bit too far to where I became kind of the opposite. I was the empathic, kind of creative type of the family that no one knew what to do with. And so I said, okay, I'll drink the Kool-Aid and I will make everyone happy, and I will join the military. After a little bit of time meandering about the countryside, not sure what to do with myself following high school. So the military, has its reasons for training people the way that they do. And so when I met you at CCARE and then a little bit more extensively at Stillheart, I was having a whole nother opportunity to learn skills that were relevant to where I found myself more directly at that new time. What I had found much later on was that was what I really had taken away, was that having the right skills for the right moment, with the right people around you, and context mattered. In the service, you have the skills for attending to what needs to be attended to in the immediate sense, a lot of times out of survival needs or necessity. But then maybe later in a different situation, those skills don't serve you so well. And so you have to find new skills or realize the difference. And so and being around people who saw the world differently from me and just had different rich life experiences to bring, like yourself, gave me an opportunity to take a deeper dive into how do I, help people like myself, service members or veterans who are struggling when they come home. How do I help, or anybody, how do I help people rise to the occasion of the new moment that they find themselves in when the old tools weren't helping anymore? And so that was the rich part of being at Stillheart with you that weekend and in being in that program.
And thank you for sharing that, because many of us are very curious what's a military person doing in the room with us, because about half the people were from the conventional healthcare industry, doctors, nurses, people working on really solving both physical and mental health issues. And there were weirdos, the interesting people like you and me. And believe it or not, even in the commercial or business space, in the entrepreneurial space, we use a lot of military jargon. We talk about locking up our customers and deadlines and
Yeah.
It's like, we don't want to bring any dead bodies home. And I was quite surprised how much aggression there is in terms of getting things done. There's this almost compulsive need to get things done. It's
Yeah.
amazing that during Corona times, how many of us are putting our life on pause. So tell me, what brought you on a personal level, what are the challenges? Because each one of us who came into learning about compassion had our own life journeys. And that
Mhm.
was the richest part of being at Stanford. Yeah, and I'm so grateful to many of my teachers, including founder Dr. Jim Doty, Margaret Cullen, Emma Sepula, amazing people. But each one of us had the courage to share our vulnerabilities and what brought us there. And I remember the first night when we were with you, we were talking, we were supposed to be silent, but we ended up just listening to each other for hours. So, what are the challenges, or what were the particular things that made you feel the need for getting into compassion and into a lifelong service of helping people find
Yeah.
meaning in their life?
Wow. Well, there's really
And you can
there's
start anywhere. It's a long
many,
question.
many places to go with that one. Um, I could talk about the professional reasons and all of these corollaries between learning a therapist and the obvious relevance of cultivating compassion skills and unconditional positive regard, as Carl Rogers would talk about in your first psychology class of how to be a therapist, and that's all well and good and relevant. Uh, but if I peel back the onion, even what got me into that and into the helping professions, and even before I was in the service, what got me into it. And the bottom line is, like I said earlier, I come from a difficult place. I come from a place where I'm the youngest of three brothers. When I was 5 years old, my father had a psychotic break and developed what came to be known as some prominent schizophrenia. And by the time I was 7, my parents were split, um, and it was a confusing place to find your footing in the world. Um, how do you find out what it means to function or be a human in the world from somebody who has a hard time maintaining their footing in reality? And but what was unequivocally clear to me was that even though my father had the illness that he did, which was not his fault and completely biological and organic, um, he was a deeply loving man, and he actually passed away last year. Uh,
Oh,
and and so I've spent a lot of time lately reflecting on who he was as a person, as you can imagine, and having a deep appreciation um, for him all these years later. Not once did I ever question his love for me or his care for me or his desire to be a positive influence in my life. But he struggled with his illness, and was, I think, in many ways ashamed of it, even though he had no cause to be. He always wanted to be something that he struggled to embody, for reasons that were not his fault. And but he was a good man. And early on, that influence, though, as when you're young, it's very confusing. And on the other side, my mother was a very strong-willed woman. Is still. Hope she's not watching this. And she had a very rule, kind of with the iron fist approach to things, which shaped me well for military service later. Uh, and but was very surface, very like Abraham Maslow talks about the hierarchy of needs. She's very based in the if you have a roof and food, I've done my job. So emotions and things were not something that were touched on. They were part of my nurture as a child because my father was absent. So my brothers were much older than me, and I, kind of was there, figuring it out, and that's kind of how a lot of my childhood went. And I think, it's taken me a long time to piece together why that would be a challenging thing. If your basic needs are met, but there are other needs people have, and as you get into this idea of what is compassion, there are needs for connection and love and support and all of these other kinds of things, which I think, similar to my father, my mother wasn't aware of these things, and she was finding her own way and dealing with those things too. But at the end of the day, when those pieces aren't there, when you're a child, you have to figure it out for yourself. I had spent my time studying, and I went in the military, and I, struggled with that. It was very, obviously disciplinarian, which maybe I needed a little. I wasn't sure what to do with myself. And the bottom line is I didn't have a lot of guidance that was nurturing and supportive. I was a little bit fearful of people at the time. And so the military was a place for me to get out and do my own, make my own strides in life, define myself independent of where I came from. But it also gave me structure, which is what I, was very inconsistent for me coming up. So even though while I was in the service, and I really hated it, what I came to appreciate about it is that there's been all sorts of people who have been in the service that hated it. And the bottom line is, it doesn't matter. People were drafted into the military, against their will. And that's what happens in life. These things happen. It doesn't matter how you feel about the concept or nature of war or human behavior. It happens. People fight. And so I did a lot of growing up there. But I also kind of lost myself through that journey. They create conditions that are very contrived for reasons that are good, considering the task at hand for the military. But they do it at an age where people are so impressionable, 18, 19, 20 years old, where they're figuring out who they are as people at all. And so the influence of the military culture becomes so enmeshed in who people come to understand themselves to be. So what I did, because I didn't like it, is I decided to just do the opposite. I owned the experience of being in the military after a little while, and I did it very well. But by the end, when they asked me whether I wanted to re-up, I decided, no, I don't want to. I want to go home and see my friends. But it left a mark on me. I didn't feel like I fit in when I was in the service. I didn't understand, growing up with an authoritarian parent, it was kind of triggering for me, and I was kind of oppositional in some ways. And I just, it wasn't my thing. So I did my time when I got out. But it stays with you, and so, but, I kind of ignored that, and I went to school, and I said, well, what would it mean to be useful from here? And I wanted to study human behavior and psychology. And so I went to school, and I finished my bachelor's degree in 2 years and kept burning the candle at both ends like they train you to do. Went to graduate school, did more of the same thing. And I made it about 2.5 years in the graduate school of being on my way to being Dr. Me, trying to help other vets, through their challenges. And then it all just caught up to me at the same time. It hit me like a truck. And I had, I was dealing with trauma. And it was a very involved trauma. It was a trauma from not just the service, but my life up to that point, and everything that had transpired. So your body doesn't care whether you enlisted at one point and then got discharge paperwork from the military. It just cares about the history and its effect on your body from birth until now. And it will tell you what your mind doesn't want you to know, or doesn't want to acknowledge. And so I was in a graduate school, and I was treating people for, all sorts of things, like, anything that people present in a therapist's office for, which obviously includes trauma. And it just started to come up for me, the nature of the work I was doing. I was meeting people's suffering, and I was doing it in a way that was immediate and real. And after a little while, I couldn't distinguish between their suffering and mine as a person. The therapist's hat and the individual's hat kind of started to dissolve into each other, and it just became this question for me about the nature of suffering. And so that was something that became kind of a primary inquiry for me, both on a very personal level through my own suffering and contending with my trauma, and also professional. And so what I had to do was I had to leave my graduate program because I wasn't able to work with people who were dealing with the same thing I was. And as fate would have it, I had an opportunity to actually go work at the hospital at Stanford. So I left my program and I moved to the Bay Area. And it just so happened I walked down, I was at lunch a couple of weeks after I started working there, and I walked down the hallway in the School of Medicine. And there was a poster on the wall that said compassion cultivation training. And I'm looking
that
at
is fascinating, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a fascinating thing to see. And I'm like, okay, so I'm in California again. I grew up here. I understand that, there's always been, since the 60s, everything going on in Northern California. And I said, okay, but I was, even though I was trained as a therapist, and I learned all about John Kabat-Zinn and mindfulness-based stress reduction and the use of all of these tools as a clinical resource, I was very skeptical of this. But I said, well, I just moved here. I don't really know anybody, so I need something to do with myself after work. I'm going to sign up for this class. So I show up for the class, and I'm kind of like, bunch of hippie nonsense, right? And I go to the first class. I'm like, what am I doing? I don't know. What am I doing here? But the bottom line is, what was drawing me to that was that I was just suffering. I was not okay. I was having long-term challenges that were affecting every area of my life. My ability to think clearly, my patience with people I would encounter in my life, all of these different kinds of issues that would come to the front of my experience that I wasn't acknowledging, but some part of me was reaching out to find my way through all of that. And So after about the second week of the course, uh, our beloved Kelly McGonigal was one of the instructors, and Leah Weiss was the other. Kelly had published a book, and she stated that she was giving a talk in the Stanford bookstore, and all were welcome to show to the talk if interested. So I said, all right, I'll go to your talk. So she gave the talk, which was wildly impressive, as Kelly is. And afterwards, she was signing copies of her book. And I said, all right, I'll bite. And her book was on willpower. It's a lovely book, The Willpower Instinct. So I said, I'll bite. And I walked up to Kelly. I said, would you, she was signing copies. So I said, would you sign a copy of my book? Sure. So she opens the book, writes a little notation inside of it, closes the book, hands it back to me, and says, look forward to seeing you in class next week. Hope you'll be there. I said, yeah, I will. Okay. So I take the book, I start walking back to my car on the other side of the campus, and about halfway through my walk, I'm like, oh, right, she wrote something inside the book. So I open the book up, and she writes, and, just very caring and affectionate way, she writes, may you be kind to yourself.
Wow.
And for me, I was pissed. Like, who does she think she is? She doesn't know anything about me. Who is this person? Just wishing me well. And I was livid, and I was like shouting in the parking lot, to a degree that was far beyond warranted, obviously. And so I keep walking for another 50 or 100 feet, and I just burst into tears, because there was this perfect stranger, and she had met me twice as I signed up and started asking all sorts of questions in her class. And she was simply wishing me well. And I could not receive that from her. I could not let myself be the recipient of her care. And it was just, there's no agenda on her part. There's nothing to be gained for her. But why am I mad? Why am I so angry? And so it was that point that everything shifted on a dime. All of my understanding of everything I had come to do, just everything screeched, because Kelly McGonigal wrote that in my book. Aren't you, Kelly? And I thought I was this knowledgeable person about all of these theories and of psychology and how to be helpful to people. And that's all nice, good information to file away. But what I realized was there was this huge, huge, huge gap between my intellectual experience of life and my desire to use that to will away or power through everything else. Power through my own direct experience, overpower it rather. And that's what you learn in the military, and that's what you learn coming up in a place where people don't talk about how they feel, and you're shamed from doing so. And that's a dynamic that is very prevalent in Western households. And I am by no means alone in that, in our culture here. And it's been a topic of intrigue of mine ever since, is how do people connect to their experience of life when we're telling them that feelings, especially men, we're telling them that having emotions are not okay. So my understanding of all these things through taking, CCT and having the training and the experience beyond that, and then just continuing my psychology training and just being a human being on planet Earth has led me to appreciate that we don't have a choice not to have emotions and feelings, and they're a part of our experience. To deny them is to deny ourselves. And once we have, we don't have to be completely subject to them, obviously, but if we ignore them, we're going to start having problems. And so when you're dealing with something like post-traumatic stress disorder, the immediate inclination is to run away from anything that you feel that's difficult. It's a disorder of avoidance, avoiding how you feel. And what's really nasty about it is that that's what, perpetuates and makes it even worse. The way out is through. And so to me, you asked the question of how are compassion trainings relevant to people in the military. I think it's some of the most foundationally relevant material you could possibly provide to someone who's been through a difficult thing, veteran or non-veteran. It is a challenge in the military community because of the obviously the training people receive. It's adaptive in many ways when you are active duty in the military to not do emotions. Your hand can't quiver. Like Jim Doty would talk about this in his talks on doing surgery. You can't blubber when you're cutting open a 6-year-old girl's skull and removing a tumor. Your hand can't quiver. The same is true of someone who's going into harm's way. It could be a serviceman or a police officer or firefighter or an EMT. Anybody who's doing these things needs to be able to navigate that situation skillfully and deliberately. And emotions can cloud our ability to do that sometimes if they're too powerful. So I really have come to love the word context, because the context of our situation requires one set of skills, and later it requires another. And I think emotional intelligence in many ways is understanding what that context is and being able to pivot and use the right skills for that situation. But being able to make the tools that are taught in programs like CCT or compassion training, or in the traditional sense, in the Buddhist sense, making those accessible to people who don't have a lot of that immediate background, is a really curious thing. I remember when I was taking compassion cultivation training and the words that were being thrown around, I'm like, nobody wants to hear this, in the West. People don't want to talk about these words. Even the word compassion can be aversive because it implies, of course, it's fundamentally wrong, but people automatically think about the idea of weakness or someone's inability to move about the world in an adaptive way is what we've errantly decided in the West. And so for me, it became, because I directly, outside of the words and my intellect, my direct experience of adopting practices that I learned in that course and program, to move and to have a direct connection to my emotional experience in such a facilitative, growth-inducing way was life-changing. It's just so fundamentally powerful. And being able to teach, someone who's gotten out of the service and is not doing well, reflecting on that experience, how to be in their body and breathe and direct their attention in a way that creates a sense of safety and opening up their heart to life and having experiences that are new and life-giving, you know, is everything that we aspire to do in helping people navigate trauma. So the practices were immediately relevant to me, not just intellectually, but experientially. And that was, I think the immediate broad benefit I had was that, wow, there's this whole domain to my existing in my direct bodily experience of these emotional states we're cultivating that I had not to date really known. And I had been through training on how to be a therapist.
Wow.
And I was like, but it was all book knowledge, you know. You might do facilitative interviewing and even some kind of emotion focused approaches, but it was, you know, not in this, it was all about me helping someone else facilitate those things. It wasn't about me exploring my own experience of those things. And so Kelly McGonigal and Leah Weiss really put me on the spot there. And it was apparent to them, obviously. Otherwise, Kelly wouldn't have written what she did in my book. And so I will forever be grateful for that experience and just for their warmth and presence and everybody I met at C-Care. You know, I met a lot of people who are very different from me. But what's so wonderful and beautiful about it is that those differences fade away. When you really start to get into what does it mean to cultivate a compassionate heart and presence, those differences don't matter at all. So I see Shankar, you know, and you know, there's a story. You have a story. I have a story. But in the immediate sense, you are two eyes and a smile looking at me, and I'm doing the same. And everything else fades away when there's intention and to do right and loving by one another, which I think is what our world is sorely lacking. And so that's a very, very long-winded answer to your question on how did a military guy get into compassion?
In fact, this is exactly what I was hoping to get without even being prompted. I'm so grateful you described that. And interestingly, this is the very first time, Adam, you and I are talking about families and what was going on. And they say there's synchronicity, there's no coincidence. You are the first person I'm talking to formally on video live streaming. And my background has some similarities to you. I was not in the military. I was in business and you know, technology. But I grew up in a household, and my mother, not my father, went through some sort of abuse in childhood, and she was diagnosed as schizophrenic or what's called manic depressive or bipolar. And she passed away 18 months ago as well.
Bless you.
The first experience I had of her, which was very, very hurtful, was her suicide attempt when I was in first grade, when I was barely 6 or 7 years old. And I was the oldest in my family, as against you being the youngest. And for the longest time, I used to hide these stories because of the stigma around mental illness.
Yeah.
So those people who know me from the external world, they see my external resume, what I like to call, entrepreneur, author, technologist, and da da da. What they fail to realize, that's true about you, that's true about me, that's true about every single person that I've met. What they fail to realize is we are all human. We all suffer. In fact, in Hindi, the language that I was brought up in, the word suffer has a different meaning. It literally means journey, like the journey of life. So suffering is a total part of the suffer or the journey of life. And it's very easy to be dismissive because we all want happiness. In fact, I worked on Project Happiness for a few years, and the whole intention was to how to come out of suffering. But you know, many people, I have not had the courage yet to tell my story like you did. And thank you for having the courage to talk about it. I even remember hearing your story during the screening of the movie. What was it called?
And yeah,
Do you remember that movie where
yeah, Emma's documentary. Yes.
free the mind, right? Free the mind. And it's so amazing to hear these stories of vulnerability. But many people, when I tell my story, what went wrong and how many things were hurtful and all, sympathize. In other words, think, oh my God, you poor thing. It's amazing in spite of all these challenges. How did you become successful? And I say,
Mm,
no, no, no. It wasn't in spite of it. It was because of it.
because of it.
It
Yeah.
is because of it. So this is where I think we are getting to what normally people would consider as a calamity, losing someone, the fear of losing someone in your case or my case, and the fear of not having a so-called normal life, not having the right kind of nurturing, which is what anybody that comes from a broken family, and who doesn't have a broken family?
Right.
It's only a matter of degree, right? So I want you to go into that. How beyond the stress and the post-traumatic, as you clearly pointed out, how it molded your life, how it made you stronger,
Yeah.
how it became the almost like how it made you what you are today, Adam.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that question so much because it is it's really seductive to get caught up in the details of what happens to us. And later my older brother developed schizophrenia, and all of these other things just keep happening in life that um, we don't plan for, we don't ask for, and so all of these challenges one after the other. Life was a very uncertain place from the start for me. And so, in a way, what I've realized looking back is that I kind of did it backwards. I started with the uncertainty, and I worked my way towards a lot of that stability that maybe a lot of people find from their earlier nuclear family, the way it all is quote supposed to happen, right? Um,
The Disney stories.
yeah, the Disney stories, and well, in a lot of circles, I grew up in a very conservative, uh, you know, Southern Baptist kind of evangelical setting, and the nuclear family was where it's at. So if you don't do that, then you're doing it wrong. And the idea that you don't, you have to appear a certain way to everyone around you as not having any problems as that perfect nuclear family, and it just wasn't true, and that burst through the seams in my family's case. And so all of that just kind of all of those facades fell away very quickly in my early life, and I think through that confusion, um, you know it has taught me one, a lot of just fundamental humility about what I can and can't influence in life. It's taught me grace, uh, and meeting uh, overwhelm, because all of those things are hugely overwhelming to a small child and to an adult for that matter. Uh, so I learned very quickly that I could not have things the way that I needed them to be, even though I sure did try for a very long time. I tried to, I was a people pleaser, oh, if I only do this, then they'll be the person I need. Right? There's a lot of very covert ways that we try to go about getting our needs met. That I tried them all, but I got the same result. So I can, through your own behavior in a hopefully positive way, you can offer something that may be influential. But trying to make things be what you wish to will them to be is not the way. And so, now we're faced with the uncertainty of our current situation.
Yeah, yeah.
I was talking with a friend of mine, and it was about having been through where I've been, and working with people now for so long who have gone through incredibly difficult and adverse circumstances. What's it like to meet what's happening now? And what's been really curious is that I haven't felt like a lot's very different in terms of how I approach it. It's deeply tragic, but so much of life can be that way. But what is so true through all of this is that life as a sum total is far from it.
Mm-hmm.
That a part of an experience of life, like what you said when you were describing the Hindi, is suffering. And we are seeing it on a very large scale right now.
Yes.
And another part of that is impermanence. What is happening now will end. And so when you operate from a position that just accepts the truth of that, and you're not at odds with the way things are, that you anticipate that large, incomprehensible events may come. You aren't at odds with what is, and you can meet it with dignity, and you can meet it with intention, and you can meet it with an openness to what will be. And you can meet yourself in your own distress and realize that that's impermanent too. And you can, as you work through that distress, you can find access to, the question of what else is there beyond my sorrow, beyond my distress. When this ends, because it will, because I know everything does. When this experience of difficulty passes, what will I do? What else is there for me?
Yeah,
And how can I take this time that I have, that I'm forced into having, this time of solitude, and nurture those qualities that I can put to work when that day comes. And so in a way, and certainly with deep, deep acknowledgement of the suffering and the loss that's happening at scale right now. In a way, this is forcing us all to say, wow, stop. Where or how have I been accessing those qualities? Have I been touching that space within myself at all? And I think for many of us, the answer has been no. It hasn't ranked, amongst the, all of the supposed necessities we've prioritized in life. And so I think this is an opportunity. There's opportunity in the pause for reflection, but even beyond reflection, acknowledgement of the impermanence of all of this, and curiosity about what's there after. What can I build now, and and where am I now? Well, you have to meet the difficulty of it all, and the bottom line is there's grief there first for many of us.
Yeah.
There's
grief. So many of us grieving right now.
Yeah. There's grieving loss. Many of us are losing our family and friends in ways in ways that are not what we thought they would be. We can't even go into the hospital to hold their hand. And I work in a hospital now, and we've had to turn people away for safety reasons when they just wanted to go sit by their loved one's bedside. And that's a very disheartening thing to do. And so it makes this condition, this human condition, very small, even though there are pushing 8 billion humans. We're all feeling the same thing, and so even though it's through tragedy, I think what we're touching on is our common humanity. There's no one unaffected by this. And my hope and my hope and what I want for humanity is to meet that same common humanity in a way that doesn't take tragedy to touch on it. And I think that's one of those pieces is like the good work that you're doing by deciding to interview people, is how can I take my skills and how can I put them to work in the service of humanity in ways that enrich people, in ways that I feel enriched, and pay it forward, so to speak. And so there's a path forward. The most influential writer for me, that really kind of spawned my interest in psychology at all, was when I was in the service and I was deployed to the Middle East. And I was very bored one day, and I was on an Air Force base, and they had a little library, and I walk in the library, and there's this little bookshelf in the corner. It's all dusty. And I walk in there, and I find a copy of Viktor Frankl, his Man's Search for Meaning, which he wrote while Viktor Frankl, for anyone who doesn't know, was a Swiss psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor. And so this book is remarkable. And he wrote it as a first-person account while he was in the concentration camps, about the differences between people who survived and did not, and the kind of mind that they brought to the situation. And a quote of his that I really love is, "That which is to give light must endure burning." And I think this is just this acknowledgement of, our suffering is how we touch our humanity. It's how we meet each other's humanity. Suffering is not all there is, but it's important to meet that for what it is and have the experience of that so that you can move through it and beyond it into that which gives us life and allows us to flourish and connect and grow with each other. And so I see opportunity, even though all we see on the news is difficulty and strife. There's opportunity in pause, as Frankel would like to say. Yeah.
And I'm so glad you touched upon so many things. I did not have a long list of questions, but you touched upon so many things we wanted to discuss. One of the interesting things I found in my life was that I chose professions that inherently have a lot of chaos, whether it's startup companies, whether it's later cancer, and how do you deal with medicines for cancer. And now in almost my retirement phase of life, I'm dealing with going around the world. Right now I'm in Cuernavaca near Mexico City. I was here for 3 weeks, and now it's been 7 weeks thanks to the lockdown in California as well as in India. So tell me about that. I find that my comfort zone is chaos, dealing with challenges. And is that true for you? I'm just curious.
No, I'm kind of the opposite. My comfort zone is complete peace and quiet.
Wow, okay.
Chaos. So that's fascinating. And, I have a brother, and he and I are completely opposite in this way, and in every other way for that matter. My brother's a lot more like my mother, and I'm a lot more like my father. And but he craves chaos, and for him, making order out of chaos is a gift he brings to the world. For me, I like to invite peace into chaos. And I think that, there's understandable reasons in terms of where I would get to that. But it's very fascinating to me how I take one path and my brother will take another. But no, chaos and I don't. I mean, I'm okay with chaos. What I'm not okay with is unnecessary chaos. And I think sometimes our approach to moving through chaos invites more chaos. And working with people in a therapeutic context, a lot of times, particularly people who are, workaholics and they neglect their family members, and because they're obsessed with productivity and they suffer as a result, can move into a space like that where their addiction to chaos spawns more chaos, and then ultimately diminishes the quality of the life that they have or their relationships. And so they seek therapy. A lot of times they'll show up for other reasons, like, oh, I'm just, tired all the time. Oh, well, tell me, oh, I work 92 hours a week. Oh, well, you thought about maybe, cutting back a little bit. And like, no, I can't do that. I got this deadline and projects, and and so it's honoring balance. And I think a lot of people who do crave chaos, or just there's an excitement. It gives you adrenaline, to be in the middle of pandemonium and be able to navigate that skillfully and with purpose. There's an honorable quality to that, and benefit to be had. A lot of people, though, once they go through their day, they have a hard time turning that off and just being able to recharge and unplug. And so I think there's opportunity in this pause that we have now for a lot of people who may be,
And as we bring this conversation to a close, Adam, I would like to know from you, do you have any words of wisdom based on your own life? I know that you've helped thousands of people in various ways through one is personal coaching, being there for them individually, but also through the movie and through the curriculum and all that stuff. You actually met with probably thousands of people in various ways in terms of supporting their journeys. Do you have any suggestions for people, given the situation we are in, the whole COVID-19 threat, as well as the coronavirus? A lot of people are suffering, and from what I'm hearing, there's going to be a long tail to it. The physical disease may end the epidemic, but the anxiety, the loss of jobs, the chaos it has created in people's lives may last much longer. What do you suggest to people? What can they do to not just survive through this, but even grow through this? Do you have any words of wisdom?
Yeah, well, it's the most important question for all of us now. And, I may or may not have everyone's, solution. But, for my take, for what it's worth, is that life is giving us each a message. Nature is giving us each a message. And what I do know from working with people is that the more at odds with the message that nature gives us, the more we're going to suffer. If our requirement of nature and reality is not aligned with the way it is showing up for us, we're going to suffer, right? And so, my suggestion would be, if you find that you're struggling with how things are happening right now, where is there an opportunity in the quiet, in the space, in the simpleness of being present with yourself, and just, instead of trying to overpower or will away any of the feelings you may have about it, giving it air to be just what it is. I feel anxious, and then having some curiosity about what does it mean to feel anxious, without having to make it something different or to make it go away. Because what happens when you do that is it starts to go away. And you become the fish in the river as opposed to always trying to be the fisherman. And we're all in the river right now. We're all finding out where the current takes us, and we thought we had it figured out, but we definitely didn't, and that's very destabilizing. But maybe there's opportunity there to find another perch on which we build our stability. And so, anxiety is having dread about what may happen, and sadness is, having excessive thoughts about what did happen. And in the middle of those two opposites, there's now. And so what is happening now for me? I'm having a feeling of anxiety. Okay. And just giving that room to breathe, because now we have an opportunity, we have room for it to breathe. And I think that's a gift that we can give ourselves, and it's a gift that we can give to everyone in our immediate circle. A lot of us are locked up with family members in perpetuity, and we're all going nuts. And so even just that simple opportunity to breathe in acknowledgement of our direct experience, whatever it is, gives us access to the tools of resilience, and then we can move through how we feel. Everything else going on is going to keep going on, or it will happen in its own way, and we can't influence that any faster than it's willing to go. And so anxiety is telling us that things need to be a certain way, or they could be a certain way, while they are not currently. And so moving into an acceptance of what is currently, or an exploration, just the curiosity about it is an opportunity I see in all of this currently for us. And we find ourselves when we start to look, and the more deeply we do, and then we start to find each other. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, Adam, I'm very grateful for you sharing first your personal story, and this was literally the first time I heard it from you. And I'm also grateful that to be able to give those nugget of self-experience without claiming to be authority on how to go through chaos. We're not here to give formulas. We are here to share our lives, because there was a book long time ago I read by Reverend Anthony DeMello, and he called it story meditations. You and I are both fans of meditation, which is sitting in silence, watching our breath, and so on. But this is really story meditation, where we actually share the stories of our life so we can learn from each other. And in all humanity, because external resume, if somebody saw what you do and all that, and oh, he's so cool, and and we are. That is our persona. That's what
they're pretty.
Yeah. or we like to believe that. But the reality is, underneath that, there is that person who can and does suffer. That there is that vulnerability, and that's there. In my case, for example, I like to dance through chaos. But when chaos gets unbearable, I start ranting, and it's like today I had this unbelievable impulse to run away and go into the market, because I have not done that in the last 1 month. I really wanted to go to the museum and maybe sneak in and go inside the museum. I'm human, right? So then I called a couple of friends and said, no, don't do that. There are cops everywhere. And in fact, Mexico is not even in a total lockdown. It's in self-isolation. But many parks are closed. Many public places are closed. So then I had to just go for a walk in the neighborhood and watch the clouds, you know? So again, thank you. And I'm so grateful, Adam. We will be bringing more such stories. And you're welcome to join us, Adam, because I benefited so much. I've learned so much through the sharings we've had. I don't always remember the content, and so don't you. But the experience of being present to each other has been very powerful. So, anybody who's watching here, if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, it is a serious topic. How do we navigate through these choppy waters? At the same time, there'll be jokes, there'll be stories. And if you have any questions on to for either to Adam or to me, please comment on this, and I will make sure I navigate some of those things to Adam and find any answers. Yes, we could give you lots of links. We could give you share lots of videos, but they're all there right now on the internet. Every day there are so many of our teachers giving meditation classes and all. What do you think, Adam? Is there some way we can communicate with those people who have questions? What would be the best way for you?
Yeah, maybe if you want to leave a comment, and I'm sure Shankar, you can find a way to forward that my way.
And again, thank you. Thanks a lot. I also grew up in a conservative family, and we've evolved. We've changed quite a bit since then into a new kind of living, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and everyone from all walks. There's wisdom in those positions, and perspective to offer and share. And so, Shankar, I'm very grateful to you for extending the invitation and for the opportunity to share my story. So.
And I think we are both grateful to many, many teachers, many well-wishers, many people who challenged us, because without those challenges, we wouldn't be where we are. And we are grateful to all of you who are listening to us. And thank you again.
Thank you, Shankar. Bye-bye.
Bye now.